Rock immortality. It's a rarefied state reserved for only a select few. Today's featured band no doubt earned it with the release of their 8th studio album, a 10-track collection that eclipsed the competition. But what do you do after you've realized your wildest dreams and had an album like that? Well, that question almost tore this band apart. They felt stagnant, uninspired. These guys were just going through the motions. That is until one of them dredged up the guilt that he felt over exiling their former frontman. Building that into a concept album that the critics tore apart, but that fans bought in droves. This record would feature a guest vocalist who came out of nowhere and a centerpiece song that was 26 minutes long. And it also brought back this troubled former frontman in a truly mystical way. An amazing story about this record is coming up next on Professor of Rock. Hey music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. You know, if you used to study the liner notes and the album covers for clues to the mysteries of rock and roll, you're gonna dig this channel of deep musical nostalgia. Make sure to subscribe below right now. We're on our way to 1 million subs. If you would just subscribe, share, and like this content, it'll keep rock and roll alive and keep us going. We appreciate it. So it's time for another edition of our series, The New Standards. This is a show that takes an in-depth look into songs that transcend genre, decade, and fads. You know, songs or records that are monumental touchstones in our culture and our society. On today's episode, we're covering Pink Floyd's 1975 masterpiece album, the powerful and awe-inspiring epic 9-part track, Shine On You Crazy Diamond. So heading into 1974, Pink Floyd was faced with what seemed like an impossible task. You know, following up one of the all-time biggest selling albums ever put to vinyl, talking about 1973's landmark record, The Dark Side of the Moon. You know, one of rock's most elite and revered records. Dark Side reached #2 in the UK charts and it went to #1 in America. It going to sell over 15 million copies in the US and 50 million plus worldwide. But even more than that, Pink Floyd's 8th studio album was a flawless collection of timeless tracks that, you know, truly inspired and amazed listeners the world over for over 5 decades. However, that kind of mega success, you know, is a double-edged sword. Yeah, the upsides were phenomenal: fame, fortune untold, rock immortality. But there was also an inordinate amount of pressure weighing on the band. I mean, what do you do for an encore after that? How do you follow that up? That was a predicament that the iconic foursome of David Gilmour, Roger Waters, Nick Mason, and Rick Wright found themselves in. What do you do next? The band would wrestle over that question for the next couple years. Resulted in a few false starts before actual recording sessions began in January of '75. The problem clearly didn't lie with the collective talents of the band members. Rather, it was a matter of how to once again blend those talents all together. Relative harmony had prevailed during the creation of Dark Side. However, unity was fast becoming a fading memory for this band. After instigating the creation of Dark Side of the Moon, it was becoming increasingly obvious to Roger Waters that he needed to be the primary driving force behind this band, a perspective that no one else shared. However, to Roger Waters' credit, he had devised the album's concepts, the lyrics, and many of the basic melodies. But as Roger Waters began to press his ascendancy, if you will, over his colleagues, those relationships grew strained. By the end of '74, the band's dynamic was growing stagnant. Things got so bad for a while, it seemed as if Pink Floyd was on the brink of maybe breaking up. In Nick Mason's words, group momentum was pretty well non-existent. The early days of total commitment were beginning to dissipate. So when the official sessions for Wish You Were Here finally got underway on January 13th of '75 at Abbey Road Studio 3, the band had 3 songs prepared for the new album, ones that they had been working on over the past year. There was Raving and Drooling, Gotta Be Crazy, and Shine On You Crazy Diamond.
Gotta be crazy, you gotta be mean, you gotta get your shoes in the dark clean. You were caught in...
However, no sooner than Pink Floyd began, they promptly hit a wall, no pun intended. Uninspired and disconnected, the band members struggled for weeks to build that momentum. Roger Waters called the sessions very laborious and very tortured. Seemed as if everyone was just going through the motions, and what was worse, there was the communal feeling of everyone wanting to be somewhere else. Said Waters about it, finding ourselves shut up in Abbey Road studio, it felt like a real constraint. Most of us didn't wish that we were there at all. We wished we were somewhere else. I wasn't happy being there because I got the feeling that we weren't together. Yet, it would be this feeling that would unexpectedly prove to be the album's saving grace. This realization helped Roger Waters reframe how he wanted to approach this record. He would build a concept album around the stupor that this band was experiencing in real time. Themes of alienation, fragmentation, and insanity all came to the forefront. But in a word, Roger Waters would describe the theme of the record as absence. It was an idea that also fittingly referenced Pink Floyd's Phantom fifth member, Syd Barrett. He had never really left the recesses of Waters' mind. Haunted by the guilt and the regret of sending the former frontman into schizophrenic exile years earlier, Roger Waters decided to use this album as kind of a therapy, exposing his sorrow over Barrett's forced departure. Now, to facilitate this new approach, Roger Waters suggested to the band that they drop 2 of the songs, Raving and Drooling and Gotta Be Crazy, and build the record around Shine On You Crazy Diamond, a track that was all about Syd. Waters further suggested they divide Shine On You Crazy Diamond, which was growing into a 26-minute epic, into 2 separate movements. The first section would open the album, and the second section would conclude it. Waters was able to convince Wright and Mason about this new turn of direction. However, David Gilmour was dead set against it. Said Gilmour about it decades later, "I had a legendary row with the rest of the band. After Dark Side, we were really floundering around. I wanted to make the next album, more musical, because I felt some of these tracks had just been vehicles for the words." Gilmour was also adamant that they keep Shine On You Crazy Diamond intact and place the song in its entirety on side 1 of the new LP, similar to Adam Hartmuther's title song and Echo on Metal. However, after many long and heated discussions, Gilmour was outvoted 3-1 and ultimately conceded. Subsequently, 3 new songs were written to fit in between the 2 halves of Shine On: Welcome to the Machine, Have a Cigar, and Wish You Were Here. The last of which would also provide the name for the album, of course. How I wish you were here. Incidentally, Raving and Drooling and Gotta Be Crazy were both reworked into Floyd's 1977 epic Animals. The initial set of recording sessions continued until about mid-March, when the band broke for a month-long U.S. tour. And then returning from the States, the band spent the month of May back at Abbey Road 3 refining the tracks. Then after yet another American tour, they finished off the album in 3 more weeks of work. In all, Wish You Were Here would take some 70 sessions to complete. Released on September 12, 1975 in the UK, and then the next day, the 13th in America. It's hard to believe now, but Wish You Were Here was critically savaged at the time. I have to say, as a follow-up to one of the greatest albums ever released, it's truly an inspired follow-up. Who really cares about the critics at this point? And even though Wish You Were Here wouldn't match the astronomical numbers of Dark Side of the Moon, it no doubt became a commercial juggernaut in its own right. It was a resounding success worldwide, going to #1 in the UK, #1 in the US, and #1 in Australia, Finland, Italy, New Zealand, and in Spain. So the impetus for Shine On You Crazy Diamond, that goes back to 4 simple notes spawned from David Gilmour's Stratocaster. While the band was still in the early stages of Wish You Were Here, Waters heard Gilmour playing the track's signature mournful guitar refrain, and his thoughts immediately turned to Syd Barrett. Those 4 notes, known by the band as Syd's theme, it completely opened the way for this classic track to become what it is. Said Gilmour about it, and I quote, "I played it a few times and I put some digital delay lines and other effects on it, and I started playing it again, and it sort of pinged out and sounded nice, and I said, oh, that's really great. Roger really got off on it. He got exactly the same from it as I was getting from it. As Shine On began to take shape, it expanded into a series of codependent sections that, as I mentioned before, were divided into 2 movements. And all there were 9 individual parts for a rough total of 26 minutes of music. Parts 1 through 5 on side 1, that tallied 13 minutes and 33 seconds. And then parts 6 through 9 on side 2 came in at 12 minutes and 24 seconds. And all the song comprises nearly 60% of Wish You Were Here's 44 minutes and 5-second runtime, making it a monster of a track. The production of Shine On took a vast number of recording sessions and demanded an insane amount of effort by everyone involved. And although the recording atmosphere was far from ideal, you'd say, with the band struggling to gel, each member still provided significant contributions to this multi-part epic. Wright's swirling keyboards in particular set a funeral-like mood. And Gilmour's brilliant guitar work is once again on par with the rest of his phenomenal career. In the studio, Waters' vocal sessions, those proved to be a real nightmare. According to the bassist, the vocals were right on the edge of his range. And already insecure about his singing, Waters would hammer out his vocals again and again, trying to get it just right. He called it fantastically boring to record. He also said he had to do every line over and over just to get it to sound reasonable. We'll talk more about that in a second. Now, as we continue to break down this epic record, I do want to thank our sponsor, Zenni Eyewear, the glasses I always wear on here. Right now, you can get a pair of premium progressive lenses starting at just $52.95. Experience comfort, quality, and value with this premier offering. Just click on our info button right up here to get yours. So as Roger Waters was coming up with the lyrics for Shine On You Crazy Diamond, he soon realized that this song was all about Syd Barrett. In his words, there were no other crazy diamonds, just Syd. Drawing on Barrett's sad experience, Waters wrestled with the band's collective guilt over how they treated their friend during his ouster. I mean, in particular, it was Roger Waters who had muscled up the courage to expel Syd from the band. Waters, who was, of course, intensely ambitious, he was determined to see this band succeed. And that really couldn't happen with a frontman who was losing his mind. There's plenty of stories about that. When they play live, he just kind of stand there. Said to Waters about it, Floyd couldn't have happened without Syd, yet it could have never progressed with Syd. Dark Side of the Moon was an album about the universal condition of insanity. Wish You Were Here was a personal album about me, about us, about Syd. I had a lot of difficult emotions to deal with over Syd, and Shine On was the way I expressed them. End of quote. Roger wanted the lyrics to get as close as possible to the feelings he was having about Syd. Now, consequently, Shine On's lyrics simultaneously celebrate Syd's insanity and mourn his loss. They use some incredible imagery to do this, I might add. Even just hearing the opening lyrics, as a listener, you're dumbstruck by the melancholy beauty of it all.
Remember when you were young?
Remember when you were young. You shone like the sun. Now there's a look in your eyes like black holes in the sky.
Like black holes in the sky.
It pierces the heart. It's just pure prog rock poetry. Now, throughout the song, Waters goes on to endow Syd with a number of titles, each descriptive of either the man's radiant potential or his tragic demise. On the other hand, Waters calls Syd a legend, a seer of visions, a painter, and a piper. And on the other, a raver, a prisoner, a stranger, and a target for faraway laughter.
Come on, you target for faraway laughter.
But ultimately, the title that sums Syd up best is simply Crazy Diamond. In the end, Waters called the song his homage to Syd, as well as a heartfelt expression of his sadness for the loss of his true friend.
Come on, you stranger, you legend, you mountain.
So like I said before, because the vocals tore up Roger Waters' voice so badly, the band had to bring in a guest vocalist for the song Have a Cigar, which would be the album's single. In an interview with Mojo Magazine in 2011, in fact, David Gilmour remembered this about having to find a sub for Roger, and I quote, "Roger had a go at singing it, and one or two people were unkind about his singing. One or two people then asked me to have a go at it. I did, but I wasn't comfortable. I had nothing against the lyrics. Maybe the range and intensity just wasn't right for my voice. I can distinctly remember Roy Harper leaning on the wall outside Abbey Road while we were nattering away, and he was growling, 'Go on, let me have a go, let me have a go.' We all went, 'Shut up, Roy.' But eventually we said, 'Go on then, Roy, have your bloody go.' Most of us enjoyed his version, though I don't think Roger ever liked it." Folk singer Roy Harper was actually recording down the hall, and he talked the legendary band into this. Very cool.
Yeah, boy, have a cigar, you're gonna go far.
You may remember Roy was friends with Robert Plant and Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin, also friends with Pink Floyd. In fact, their song Hats Off to Roy Zeppelin, that's an homage to Roy. He answered the bell there, and he did it really well. Have a Cigar like Welcome to the Machine. That's a song about evil corporations and how they manipulate and control bands and artists. And it includes the classic line, by the way, which one's pink? This is, of course, a question many people in the music industry asked this band over the years. So cool that Roy Harper subbed in on one of the biggest songs from this album. So let's talk about pop culture in Shine On You Crazy Diamond. It actually hasn't had many media placements throughout the years, though recently it's appeared in a few. It was in Mythic Quest in 2020 and Russian Doll in 2022. It was also referenced in the Simpsons episode The Old Man and Lisa. Monty Burns meets a hippie at a recycling center and says to him, "Shine on, you crazy diamond."
My hemp-smoking friend, shine on, you crazy diamond.
There also hasn't been a lot of covers. Of course, the Pink Floyd tribute bands have covered it, but there's a short list here. Steve Lukather from Toto's done it. Humphreys McGee and the Flaming Lips, also Stone Temple Pilots, covered it. There's also a performance of Shine On You Crazy Diamond featuring Crosby and Nash. That's worth checking out as well. I'll link to it.
You crazy diamond.
This is one of those songs that just blows your mind. It's so epic and seismic. A song from another space and time entirely. A song from another world. Its mystery and its legend will only deepen once you hear this story. Maybe you've heard it, maybe you haven't. On June 5th, 1975, the band gathered at Abbey Road to hear the final mix of Shine On You Crazy Diamond. David Gilmour had just gotten married hours before to his American girlfriend, Ginger. And because Pink Floyd was leaving on tour the next day, the couple decided to invite everyone to the studio for a small party. It was sometime during this session that a ghost from the past walked into the studio unnoticed in the form of a fat, bald man with shaved eyebrows. He was wearing a white trench coat with a toothbrush in his pocket. Said Nick Mason, and I quote, "First we thought he was someone who worked at the studio. Nobody recognized him. Actually, according to Rick Wright, it was about 45 minutes before anyone figured out who this stranger was." Said Rick, "I sat down with Roger at the desk and we worked for about 10 minutes, and this guy kept on getting up, brushing his teeth, and then sitting. He was doing some really weird things, but he kept quiet. I said to Roger, 'Who is he?' And Roger said, 'I don't know.' And I said, 'Well, I assumed he was a friend of yours.' And he said, 'No, I don't know who he is.' Anyway, it took me a long time, and then suddenly I realized it was Syd Barrett." Nick Mason admitted that he was horrified when he made the connection. Syd didn't look like Syd at all. And according to engineer Brian Humphreys, everyone just sort of stood there, just shell-shocked. Soon, though, tears began to well up in Roger Waters' eyes. It was a terribly sad moment. Here was this great, fat, bald, mad person, quite obviously lost in another world altogether, who's standing in for this bright genius that they used to know. It was an eerie thing, because Syd came in while Roger was finalizing his vocals for Shine On You Crazy Diamond. I mean, how's that for irony? For some incredible reason, Syd Barrett picked the exact day that his former band was finishing up their epic tribute to him to come in. It had been something like 2 years since the band had last seen him at all. How's that for random precision? After some odd conversation with members of the group and their entourage and a short visit to the Gilmour's wedding reception, Syd Barrett then disappeared into the night. It was actually the last time anyone from the band would ever see Syd Barrett again. Truly magical. Thanks so much for watching. Leave us a comment about Pink Floyd and Shine On You Crazy Diamond. What are your memories of this song? What do you think about this epic track, about this epic album? Let's have a great discussion below celebrating Syd Barrett and this genius song, this tribute to him, and talk about one of the greatest bands ever. Definitely one of my top 5 ever, Pink Floyd. If you like our content, we invite you to subscribe. We would love to have you as part of our community. Help us get to 1 million. Until next time, 3 chords and the truth, my friends.